A frustrated flight attendant faced a black police officer who handed her his boarding pass. On a whim, she refused him access to the aircraft. In that moment, both of their lives changed, and the events that unfolded turned regret and forgiveness into a spectacular triumph. Officer Daniel Thompson was a decorated black police officer. On a Tuesday morning, he boarded a flight for an important conference on police community relations. When he handed his boarding pass to the flight attendant, her eyes narrowed as she scrutinized him more than necessary. Daniel sensed the tension immediately and felt the weight of her stare. Passengers behind him shifted impatiently. Finally, the flight attendant shook her head. "There's an issue with your ticket," she said. Daniel frowned. There had been no issue at the check-in counter. Confusion turned to disbelief as he realized what was happening. This wasn't just a mistake. It felt personal. To the flight attendant in front of him, he was just a black man. But Officer Daniel Thompson was making a difference in the world. One of his most notable achievements was his work with at-risk youth. He started a mentorship program that paired young people with police officers who could provide guidance and support. The program had a profound impact, reducing juvenile delinquency rates and fostering trust between the youth and the police. Daniel's efforts did not go unnoticed. At a recent commendation ceremony, Daniel stood proudly as the mayor praised his contributions. The room was filled with his colleagues, community members, and his proud parents. The mayor spoke of Daniel's tireless work, his bravery, and his compassion. Daniel received a medal for his service, a symbol of his dedication to making the world a better place. In contrast, Sarah's life was a whirlwind of stress and responsibility. As a flight attendant, she juggled long hours, demanding passengers, and the constant pressure to maintain a perfect image. Sarah was known for her diligence and professionalism. She always ensured that everything ran smoothly on her flights. But beneath the calm exterior, she was struggling. Sarah had recently gone through a painful divorce. The emotional toll was immense. It had left her feeling isolated and overwhelmed. She was also dealing with financial strain. Every month, she tried to manage her bills while supporting her aging parents. The stress of her personal life seeped into her work. It made her more irritable and less patient than usual. But despite her struggles, Sarah took pride in her job. She loved the feeling of being in control, of knowing that she was responsible for the safety and comfort of her passengers. But the weight of her personal issues often made it hard to focus. She found herself second-guessing her decisions and worrying about things she couldn't change. Above all, she felt constantly on edge. On the day of the incident with Daniel, Sarah had already dealt with several difficult passengers. She was tired and frustrated. Her nerves were frayed. When she saw Daniel, something in her snapped. She didn't recognize him as a decorated officer or a community hero. All she saw was a potential problem, another source of stress in her already chaotic day. Daniel was unaware of Sarah's struggles. He only felt the sting of her scrutiny. He had faced discrimination before, and it never got easier. As a black man in a predominantly white profession, he knew that he had to work twice as hard to prove himself. He had earned his place through hard work and dedication, but moments like this reminded him that prejudice was still very much alive. Sarah's decision to deny Daniel's boarding wasn't just about a flagged ticket. It was a culmination of her stress, her personal biases, and her inability to cope with the pressure she was under. As Daniel walked away, he felt humiliated and confused. Sarah remained at the gate, entirely unaware of the storm she had just unleashed. Their paths, shaped by different experiences and struggles, were about to intersect in a way that would change both their lives forever. Daniel knew he had to handle this carefully. Losing his temper would only make things worse. "All right, I'll speak to security," he said to himself as he walked away. He could hear the whispers and see the judgmental stares from the other passengers. He felt a surge of anger and helplessness. This wasn't just about a ticket. It was about the underlying prejudices that still existed, the assumptions people made based on the color of his skin. At the security desk, Daniel explained the situation to a guard. The guard looked at Daniel's boarding pass and frowned. "This ticket isn't flagged," he said, puzzled. "There's nothing wrong with it." Daniel felt a wave of relief. He asked the guard to tell the flight attendant. He simply couldn't miss the flight. The guard nodded and picked up a phone, speaking briefly with someone on the other end. After a moment, he hung up and motioned for Daniel to follow him back to the gate. As they approached, Daniel saw Sarah standing there with her arms crossed. The guard handed her the boarding pass. "There's no security issue with this ticket," he said. "You should let him board." Sarah glanced briefly at the boarding pass and then back to Daniel. She said she wasn't comfortable allowing him on the flight, that he'd have to take a later one. The guard looked incredulous. "That's not up to you. If his ticket is valid, he has the right to board." Sarah's face flushed with irritation. She said she had the right to deny boarding if she felt there was a potential threat, and that it was her call. Daniel's frustration boiled over. A potential threat? On what grounds? This was absurd. Passengers were openly watching now, their phones recording, and Daniel felt humiliated. He took a deep breath and forced himself to stay composed. When he turned and walked away, his heart pounded with anger and humiliation. He had always prided himself on his ability to handle difficult situations with grace, but this definitely felt like a personal attack. He could hear the murmurs of the crowd and see the judgment in their eyes. Outside the gate, Daniel found a quiet corner and pulled out his phone. He called his supervisor and explained the situation. "Stay calm, Daniel. We'll get this sorted out," his supervisor said. After leaving the airport, Daniel immediately filed a formal complaint with the airline. He recounted every detail of the incident and made sure to include how he felt unjustly scrutinized and humiliated. He sent the complaint to the airline's customer service and waited. The airline's management team took the complaint seriously. Within hours, an internal investigation was launched. The investigation team reviewed the security footage, the recorded conversations at the gate, and the documentation related to Daniel's ticket. They needed to understand what had gone wrong and why. Sarah's manager, Linda, was called in to discuss the situation. She sat across from Sarah in a small, sterile office. Linda's expression was stern, her disappointment evident. "Explain yourself," Linda demanded. Sarah shifted uncomfortably in her seat. "I thought I saw a security alert on his ticket. With everything that's been going on, I didn't want to take any chances." Linda leaned forward, her eyes narrowed. The records didn't show any security alerts. None of the other passengers on that flight had any issues. "Why did you single Daniel out?" Sarah's mind raced. She searched for an explanation that would justify her actions. "I was just trying to follow protocol to ensure everyone's safety." Linda sighed deeply and rubbed her temples. "There are protocols for a reason, Sarah, but they have to be based on facts, not assumptions or personal biases. And kicking a man off a plane because the color of his skin screamed danger? That was definitely a bias." Linda continued, telling Sarah that Daniel wasn't even a random black man. He was a respected police officer attending a conference on police community relations. Sarah's face paled as Linda's words sank in. "I didn't realize. I was under a lot of stress, and I thought I was doing the right thing," Sarah stammered. Linda shook her head. "Stress is never an excuse for discrimination. This incident has already gained a lot of attention, and it's putting the airline in a very bad light." Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes as she began to comprehend the gravity of her mistake. "I didn't think it through. I just saw him and felt, I don't know, uneasy. It wasn't rational." Linda's expression softened slightly, but her tone remained firm. "This is a serious matter, Sarah, and it has to be addressed properly." Sarah nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. She felt a wave of regret and shame wash over her. She had let her personal issues cloud her judgment, and now she was going to face the consequences. Meanwhile, Daniel received a call from the airline's customer service. An internal investigation was underway, and they took his complaint very seriously. They assured him that appropriate actions would be taken to address the issue and prevent such incidents in the future. Daniel felt a small sense of relief knowing that his voice was being heard. However, the incident still lingered in his mind. He couldn't shake the feeling of being judged and singled out because of his race. He hoped that the investigation would lead to real change, not just for himself, but for everyone who had ever faced similar discrimination. As the investigation unfolded, the true impact of Sarah's actions became increasingly clear, setting the stage for the twists and turns yet to come. News of the incident between the flight attendant and the rejected black man spread quickly. A passenger who had recorded the confrontation posted the video on social media. Within hours, it went viral. The hashtag Justice for Daniel began trending. Thousands of people expressed their outrage over the blatant discrimination. Daniel's phone buzzed nonstop with messages of support from friends, family, and even strangers. Major news outlets picked up the story. They interviewed Daniel and highlighted his commendable work in the community. He became a symbol of perseverance and integrity, someone who stood against prejudice and injustice. His calm demeanor during the incident only amplified the respect people had for him. The airline's management faced intense backlash. Their public relations team scrambled to issue statements, but despite their efforts, the damage to their reputation was significant. They had lost public trust. Sarah's life also began to unravel. Her name and face were all over the internet, and she became the target of widespread criticism. People who had once admired her professionalism now saw her as a symbol of intolerance and prejudice. Her inbox flooded with hate messages and threats, and her social media accounts were bombarded with harsh comments. Sarah's stress and guilt compounded as she realized the full extent of her actions. She couldn't go anywhere without feeling the weight of people's judgment. Her friends and colleagues distanced themselves, unsure of how to support her. Even her family, who had always stood by her, struggled to understand why she had acted the way she did. The airline placed Sarah on indefinite leave, pending the outcome of the investigation. Without the distraction of work, she had more time to reflect on her actions and the consequences they had wrought. Every headline, every angry message, felt like a dagger to her heart. She had made a terrible mistake, and now she was paying the price. Her mental health deteriorated. She had trouble sleeping. Nightmares of the incident plagued her. She stopped going out for fear of facing the public. Her world became a small, confined space where she was constantly reminded of her failure. One evening, as she scrolled through the countless messages on her phone, Sarah came across a post from Daniel. He had shared a story about his experiences with discrimination and how they had shaped his determination to bring about positive change. His words were powerful and inspiring, but they also filled Sarah with an overwhelming sense of remorse. She realized that her actions had not only hurt Daniel, but had also reinforced the very prejudices he was fighting against. She knew she needed to do something to make amends, but she felt lost and unsure of where to start. The mountain of consequences seemed insurmountable. As the media frenzy continued, Daniel remained focused on his mission. He used his newfound platform to advocate for systemic changes within the airline industry and beyond. He spoke at community events and shared his story. His resilience and grace under pressure inspired many. Sarah watched from the sidelines. Perhaps there was a way to turn her mistake into something positive. She began to think about how she could contribute to the cause and make a real difference in atoning for her actions. It was a long road ahead, but she was determined to take the first step. The media storm had turned their lives upside down, but it had also set the stage for growth, understanding, and ultimately redemption. As the investigation neared its conclusion, the intertwined fates of Daniel and Sarah continued to unfold, leading them toward an uncertain but hopeful future. Over the weeks as the investigation continued, Sarah's isolation deepened. She spent most of her time at home. One evening, she decided to attend a support group for people dealing with stress and anxiety. She needed to talk to someone, to find a way to cope with the overwhelming guilt. At the support group, Sarah hesitantly shared her story. She didn't mention names or specific details. She spoke about the incident, her regret, and how it had upended her life. After the session, a middle-aged woman approached her. "Your story really touched me," the woman said. "My name is Karen, and my son was involved in a police operation a few years ago. It changed our lives." Sarah listened, curious and slightly distracted by her own thoughts. She asked what had happened. Karen said, "My son Eric was caught up with the wrong crowd. One night, things got out of hand, and he was taken hostage by a gang. The police launched a rescue operation, and one officer in particular went above and beyond to save him. His name was Daniel Thompson." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. Daniel Thompson. The woman continued, "Yes, Officer Thompson risked his life to save my son. If it weren't for him, Eric wouldn't be here today." Daniel stayed with Eric until the paramedics arrived, talking to him, keeping him calm. It was incredible. Sarah's mind raced. She felt a deep sense of guilt and regret wash over her. The very man she had wronged was the same man who had saved a young man's life. She felt as if the ground had been pulled out from under her. How could she have treated him so unfairly? The weight of her actions settled heavily on her. She needed to apologize to him. She needed to find a way to make amends. The next day, Sarah reached out to Karen, explaining everything she had learned and how she had wronged Daniel. Karen was shocked but supportive. "You need to talk to him," she said. "Daniel's a good man. He'll understand." With Karen's help, Sarah managed to get Daniel's contact information. She composed a heartfelt email. In it, she explained who she was, the connection between them, and expressed her deepest apologies for her actions. She poured her heart into every word, hoping that Daniel would understand her remorse and sincerity. Daniel received the email while he was in the middle of a community meeting. When he saw Sarah's name, his initial reaction was anger. But as he read her words, his anger slowly turned to astonishment. He remembered the night he had saved Eric. The relief on the young man's face was etched in his memory. Daniel understood that people made mistakes, and he had always believed in second chances. Sarah's apology seemed genuine. He could sense the depth of her regret. After a few days of reflection, Daniel decided to meet with her. He wanted to hear her side of the story, to understand what had driven her actions, and to see if they could find a way forward. The meeting was arranged at a local cafe, a neutral ground where they could talk openly. When they met, Sarah was visibly nervous. Daniel greeted her with a calm demeanor. They sat down, and she took a deep breath before speaking. "Daniel, I'm so sorry for what I did. I let my personal issues and biases cloud my judgment. I know I can't undo the harm I've caused, but I want to make it right." Daniel listened intently. He thanked her for the apology. Then he told her the only thing that mattered now was how they moved forward and what they could do to prevent this from happening to anyone else. Sarah nodded. This felt like hope. This meeting was the beginning of a new chapter, one where they could work together to make a difference. Daniel leaned forward. "Join me in my community outreach programs," he said. "Help educate people about the importance of diversity and inclusion. Use your experience to show others how prejudice can blind us and how we can overcome it." Sarah accepted immediately. She wanted to make a difference, to turn this mistake into something good. Daniel smiled. He told her it wouldn't be easy, but said he believed she was up to the challenge. Tears streamed down Sarah's face as she nodded. "Thank you, Daniel. Thank you for giving me this chance." In that moment, they both felt a sense of redemption. The path ahead would be difficult, but they were ready to face it together, united in their mission to bring about change and understanding. As Daniel and Sarah worked side by side, a genuine friendship developed. They saw firsthand the positive impact they were making, from reducing biases to fostering stronger community bonds. The incident that was once a source of pain and conflict had transformed into a powerful catalyst for change. On a Thursday in May, Sarah and Daniel stood together at a community event. They were surrounded by people from all walks of life, united in their commitment to understanding and empathy. Their story was all about the power of second chances and the enduring strength of the human spirit, and they were using that to change the world one person at a time. Despite the initial conflict, Daniel and Sarah's collaboration led to numerous initiatives aimed at addressing systemic issues. They developed training programs for airline staff, focusing on diversity, inclusion, and recognizing unconscious biases. These programs were designed to prevent incidents like the one they experienced and to create a more inclusive environment for everyone. Daniel shared his experiences of discrimination during his cop training, detailing the numerous humiliations he had endured. He recalled how he had been underestimated, scrutinized, and often treated unfairly simply because of his race. These memories had resurfaced when Sarah had denied him boarding, amplifying his feelings of anger and helplessness. One particular memory stood out vividly. During his first year at the police academy, Daniel had been the only black cadet in his class. The training was rigorous, but Daniel was determined to prove himself. Despite his hard work, he often felt isolated. His fellow cadets sometimes made offhand comments about his race, joking that he was only there to fill a quota. The instructors, though more subtle, were no less biased. They scrutinized his every move, waiting for him to make a mistake. One incident, in particular, had left a lasting scar. During a high-stress simulation, Daniel had performed exceptionally well, but the instructor had publicly berated him, accusing him of endangering his team. The criticism was unwarranted and harsher than anything his white peers had received. That day, Daniel had felt the full weight of his skin color. It was a humiliating experience that had fueled his resolve to succeed despite the odds. Sharing these stories was painful, but it was necessary. It helped others understand the deep-seated prejudices that still existed in society. Sarah listened intently, her heart aching with guilt for having added to his burdens. She realized that her actions had not only been unfair, but had also triggered painful memories for Daniel. As part of their outreach efforts, they organized community dialogues where people could share their experiences with discrimination and learn from one another. These events were powerful, fostering empathy and understanding among participants. Sarah often spoke about her own biases and the incident with Daniel, using it as a lesson in humility and growth. Her openness and willingness to learn helped others see that change was possible, even for those who had made grave mistakes. Together, they also advocated for policy changes within the airline industry. They pushed for mandatory diversity training for all airline staff and the implementation of clearer guidelines to prevent discriminatory practices. Their efforts were met with resistance at first, but their persistence paid off. Over time, the airline industry began to adopt their recommendations, leading to a more inclusive environment for both staff and passengers. Through their work, Daniel and Sarah became close friends. They supported each other through the challenges and celebrated their successes together. Daniel continued to mentor at-risk youth, often inviting Sarah to speak to them about the importance of empathy and understanding. Her story of redemption resonated with many of the young people, showing them that it was possible to overcome their past mistakes and make a positive impact. As they reflected on their journey, both Daniel and Sarah knew that there was still much work to be done. But they were committed to their mission, driven by the belief that real change was possible. Their story, once a source of pain and conflict, had become a beacon of hope and inspiration for many. Years later, at an anniversary event for their community outreach programs, Daniel and Sarah stood on stage, addressing a crowd of hundreds. The audience was a diverse mix of people, all united in their commitment to understanding and empathy. Daniel spoke about the importance of resilience and the power of second chances. Sarah shared her journey of growth and redemption, emphasizing the impact of their work. "We've come a long way," Daniel said, his voice strong and steady, "but our journey is far from over. Together, we can continue to make a difference. We can create a world where everyone is judged by the content of their character, not the color of their skin." The crowd erupted in applause, and Daniel looked over at Sarah. She smiled, her eyes filled with gratitude and determination. They had transformed their pain into a powerful force for good, and they were ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead together.